Hi, I'd like to welcome you all to today's session. I'm Michael Conway of Renaissance, and Renaissance is a value-added distributor of cybersecurity and compliance technologies based in Dublin. We're delighted to be joined with us today by Proofpoint and Henry Gerst, who's head of people protection within Proofpoint. Proofpoint is a key partner of Renaissance, and what we want to do today is to cover using AI to stop email misdelivery and preventing sensitive data loss. I was saying to Henry that his job sounds like a security type job, but actually I think it's protecting people from themselves. So a couple of little bits of housekeeping today. It's really important from our point of view that we make this as interactive for you as possible and as beneficial to you as possible. So we'd welcome any questions. We'd welcome if you have any questions, quick queries, comments, or otherwise, please put them into chat or send them directly to myself. Henry will do his session, and we're not looking to delay you today and take too much of your time, but the session then will run with the Q&A afterwards. So we'll hope to get you out earlier than had been scheduled. Um, the session is being recorded because unfortunately there are some people who would like to see it and are unable to make this time slot. So it is being recorded and would be made available to you as well. So any of you as attendees can get a recording of the session, share it with any of your team or anybody internally that you feel would be appropriate. So when you're looking at AI and the issue of email misdelivery, you may then be able to show examples to your colleagues or indeed friends or whatever it may be, or professional colleagues. The session, as I say, is being recorded. Please enter any questions into chat or send them to myself. And for the moment, all the attendees are muted for the session. So without further ado, I'll pass you on to Henry. Thank you very much.
Michael, thank you very much for having me on this morning. It's a pleasure to be a part of this morning's webinar, and I look forward to hearing of any questions as they come up throughout today. I want to start by just setting the scene a little bit and talking around why we're seeing that data breaches are at an all-time high. And we're going to dive into two of those specific use cases that I think are really the cause of this in email misdelivery and in sensitive data loss. But if we just look a little bit at what we're seeing out in the sort of wider sphere of data that's being reported as being lost and the causes behind that, email data loss really is at its all-time high. The Information Commissioner's Office in the UK and also Verizon's data breach report has labeled data being emailed to the incorrect recipient as being the #1 cause of email data loss in FY24. That was also the case in FY23 and in FY22 as well. So there has been this huge flip from phishing and ransomware being, the #1 cause of data loss now to being this use case around misdelivered email. So, as cybersecurity specialists, we've been really focused on a lot of those external threats. But just looking at the data, we're now starting to see that it's some of those more internal threats that are causing a lot of issues. Just looking at this on a slightly more wider scale, we're seeing 87% of executives see their untrained employees as the biggest risk to their business. 33% of employees. This is something that we've really honed in on in the last year or so. Is the number of employees sending misdirected emails per year, and how many times those workers are also emailing the wrong person. So what that data is telling you is that it's all being caused by employees, and those insiders are creating a lot of these challenges just because of the access that they have to systems and data and how that's changed. So as we can see here, the number of employee systems that contain some of this sensitive data, it's people in finance having access to banking platforms or billing systems, it's sales or HR, the level of access that they have to information that if exfiltrated or leaving an organization causes a major concern to that organization, it's really scaled out quite significantly. Now, when we think about the type of vulnerabilities that individuals can have, there are really sort of three areas that we think of. Employees who are making careless mistakes. Maybe they're accidentally sending data to the wrong email address. They are accidentally attaching the wrong file, or they're sending that in that IP or data to themselves. These are people who are unintentionally causing this kind of data loss. We then also have compromised individuals who are being coerced or tricked, intentionally sharing that data to someone externally. And then finally, those really malicious employees who are exfiltrating information to either steal company data or they're a bad leaver or they've been hacked. And when we think about how to break down those vulnerabilities into very specific use cases that we can then go and try and deal with in our cybersecurity roles, misdirected email is one of the number one causes of this type of activity. Misattached files, another common use case that we see. And then finally, data being sent to unauthorized accounts. So these three key kind of breaches that we identify can either be accidental or, as I say, can be malicious. Now, I'll just give you one example of a very accidental situation that we saw recently. This was someone many of you might be familiar with, a political editor for the BBC, Laura Kuenssberg, who was actually she was due to hold a interview with Boris Johnson, and 2 days prior to that interview, she attached all of the notes to the meeting and sent them directly to Boris. Also completed his name in the address and mistakenly sent across information that was obviously going to cause a lot of embarrassment. So these types of activity happen to individuals all the time. And what we've come to understand by leveraging AI is that there's a different approach that we can take in order to solve this challenge. So I want to talk a little bit now around how we at Proofpoint have chosen to come at this problem and how we're helping customers and partners to deliver a solution which leverages AI to quickly and effectively solve these use cases without the need for heavy manual lifts in designing a lot of policies in order to overcome what is quite a nuanced issue. So, as many people will be familiar with, rule-based email DLP has been around for a very long time, and it's a very critical part of a lot of securities ecosystems in security, and it's done a very good job at protecting against structured data leaving an organization. So as you can see here, if you were looking for PII data, or in the US, social security numbers, or in the UK, looking at national insurance numbers, PCI data, all of this is very easy to pick up by using a rule-based DLP approach. But what is often missed is some of these more sophisticated misdirected emails or data exfiltration with sensitive data that hasn't been classified yet. So in order to identify and protect against these types of use case, we have to take a behavioral approach, and leveraging technology that we've called adaptive email DLP, we're able to scan and understand with up to 12 months of historical email data, the behavioral pattern for every user within an organization. So just to sort of take that back a step, as we leverage the metadata available on email, we're able to map and understand the communication patterns for every single user and understand what that normal behavior looks like. Once we've understood that normal behavior, we're able to then detect those changes in activity, very subtle differences as we start to see their external email communications to identify when that individual may be performing activity outside of their norm. And so, with that behavioral understanding, we can then go and take an approach that prevents some of this email data loss occurring, specifically looking at email exfiltration of sensitive data and looking at that misdirected email use case. And I'm going to take you through now just a couple of examples of how does that analysis result in being able to stop the issue. So if we take a look at this email that you can see here and just go a little bit deeper into why rule-based email DLP struggles a little bit and can't catch some of these predefined use cases. What I'm going to show you here is an example of a misdirected email. So this email contains some sensitive information. It needs to be shared on email, but there's going to be an incorrect recipient. And then we're going to show you how Proofpoint's adaptive DLP evaluates that system and some of that risk. So on the left-hand side here, you can see that if we're leveraging rule-based DLP, it's going to take a content-centric approach to the analysis. It's going to look for what is a known bad. And so we're going to look for whether the recipients are on a deny list. We're going to try to identify whether there are any regex patterns in the body of the email. So some of the labeling that you can see here, and then any classification on the document itself that's been attached. Now, this leads to the system being able to look at this email and say, this is absolutely fine, happy to send it. If we now just switch to a behavioral approach and how Proofpoint's adaptive email DLP would look at this to analyze the risk and identify whether this is an event that should be stopped. On the right-hand side, you can see how this behavior-centric analysis is able to pick up on a number of different signals that a rule-based system is pretty blind to. The recipients on this email in particular, they've never been seen before as being emailed at the same time. There's also some sensitive project information in the body of the email, and that has never been associated with the recipient, Julia Smith, before. So all of that allows us to identify that Julia being emailed with Margaret and with John, and the fact that the reference to Idaho, Project Idaho, and the reference to financials information, as well as the attachment that has been included, has never been associated with that recipient. All of that assessment and analysis allows the behavioral AI to suggest that this might be a misdirected email and is not appropriate to send. So on that understanding, what adaptive email DLP then does is we prevent that email from being sent and present a pop-up to the pop-up warning to the end user, similar to the one that we're seeing on the screen. So there's a lot that goes on in the analysis of why an email might be a potentially misdirected email. And if I just cast your mind back to some of the data that we presented earlier, for every user within an organization, we would expect between 1 or 2 misdirected emails to be sent per year. That doesn't mean that what we want to be doing is sending an end user warning every day that there's a potential for something to be going wrong. That end user warning fatigue is very damaging to the efficacy of a product. And so we want to be much more nuanced in how we provide these end user warnings and be able to provide a lot more context behind why we think an activity might be occurring. So within this warning here, you can see that it's requested whether this particular email address, Julia Smith at one bank, is the correct recipient. There's been a very similar a naming of Julia Smith, who actually works at Tufin, which, if I was to go back, Margaret and John are also working at Tufin, and I can give you a deeper view on this in a moment. There's been a very strong correlation between the keywords contained in the subject. Are you sure that you would like to send this email to this incorrect Julia? Now, what this is doing is it's stepping in before a security team member needs to go and do this analysis. It's automatically provided that warning again to the end user to be able to say, are you sure that this is the right location for this email to be going to? Or in the case of a misattached file, are you sure that that was the right file that you meant to attach to this individual? And by doing that, it's actually preventing the data loss at the source. It's also instructing the user with some awareness training, and it's being able to do that in the moment. So that coaching is really delivering for the individual an extra layer of insight as to why this activity may want to be prevented today at that particular time, but also in the future. So what we've seen is that as we deliver these end warnings to users, in the course of a first month of deployment, individuals may expect to see a few more than they've seen before. But as we start to see that interaction, the activity drops by up to 95% in the case of misdirected emails. Users really start to understand, well, when I'm adding in my recipients to an address field, when I'm attaching files, I just need to be a little bit more conscious, because in the last couple of weeks, I've got a warning that has told me that I've done something that could have caused data loss to the business. So it really helps to reinforce a lot of that security training by being very contextual and delivering this information directly to the user. So we've seen a huge increase in a huge decrease in the number of events that occur once the technology is live. Just to talk to you a little bit more about how this technology is deployed, we're able to integrate with Microsoft 365 via the Graph API, Google Workspace, and Exchange as well. We're able to integrate very, very quickly in order to build that behavioral understanding of how users are interacting with their email. Once we've built that behavioral understanding over the course of around 24 hours, we're able to then deliver two things. Firstly, we're able to look back historically to identify whether there has been any activity in the past. We're also then able to start to warn users live within the space of days to give them that end user experience of how they're engaging with their email. So just to give you a little bit more insight into a couple of these use cases, we've already gone through this example, but as you can see, it's really looking to identify some of those key data points within an email to solve for misdirected email and be able to provide those very rich contextual warnings to end users. Now, I've spoken a lot about what we're able to do with misdirected email, but I also want to explore a little bit more today around how we can prevent data being sent to unauthorized accounts as well by leveraging this same approach. So if we use the historical email behavior of an individual, there are 4 types of analysis that we can also perform in order to detect unauthorized account activity. So if we look at these 4 classifications of reciprocity, so has an individual emailed themselves before? Or is that correspondence typically just a one-way street? And what I mean by that is, if you're emailing your own personal account, typically Henry Gorst only emails henrygorst@gmail.com. Yep, that is my email address for anyone who wants it. I'll only email myself one way. I won't email myself back the other way. On top of that, am I the only individual in my company who sends email to myself? Typically, yes. No one else within Proofpoint is emailing my personal email address. So that node analysis of a single point externally that's being emailed allows us to be much more accurate on whether that is an unauthorized account. The name similarity, as you can see on this list below, Patricia Stewart emailing pstewart@gmail.com. and then what kind of messages are being sent. So these 4 types of analysis that we perform allow us to identify which unauthorized accounts individuals may have. And by getting that analysis, when we layer that machine learning on top of the sensitivity analysis that we perform on the files that may be sent externally, we can identify very quickly whether sensitive data loss is occurring on email. So when we think about sensitive data loss, we don't always want to be classifying information in the wrong way. So pay slips, concert tickets, this is information that people typically email to themselves, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. We don't want to block everything going to a free mail address, but what we do really want to block is the information that you can see on the left-hand side here, which is sensitive information, contract data, financial information, anything that a user or an individual may find is useful to be having sent to their home, but actually is a compromising or malicious piece of activity as far as the security team defines it. So being able to classify when data is being sent to unauthorized accounts is also an incredibly important use case for us to think about and focus on here. So if we were just to take a look at this example of Rowan Martins emailing rmartins@martins.com, we've done some of that detection of the anomalous recipient. There's no reciprocity between these 2 senders. They've never communicated. They've only communicated one way. We've looked at this being a very similar name to the person who's sending the email. We've actually detected that there's no body in this email as well. And of those attachments, financials, sales forecasts, these are attachments that are pretty unwanted to be sent externally. So we've classified this as data exfiltration. Again, using that behavioral approach, we would then warn that end user by providing them with a banner that would ask them whether they want to send it and ask for their approval in order to make sure that we've caught this in the system and caught this in the UI, so that we understand whether this is an activity that they have gone ahead with, so that we can go and obviously speak to them and classify this as a potential data loss incident. Again, similarly to message-directed emails, by showing these pop-ups to an end user, what we've been able to do is change their behavior often. We've been able to explain why we think this is a sensitive file and why we think it shouldn't be leaving the organization. When they then click don't send, that reinforces that learning to prevent the activity from happening moving forward. So this can all be silently tracked. It's also worth mentioning. So we don't have to go live in showing these warnings to users initially. We want to build the trust with customers and being able to identify with them the types of activity that they think are most critical to be blocked. And once we're confident and provide that clarification over the type of sensitive data that they want to see stopped on email, we can go ahead and then start to roll out these live warnings, typically within the first week or 2 of a deployment. So I've covered a lot in today's session around particularly these 2 use cases of misdirected email and email exfiltration. Hopefully I've given everyone a sense of how our approach to leveraging AI is able to very quickly implement a solution. And I'd be very happy, number one, to take a few questions off the back of today, to answer any queries people have on the technology. But also would be happy as a follow-on to today to get you introduced to the technology and the platform. This is all delivered in the form of a user interface, which is very interactive, and we don't really require customers to be leveraging this back end. Ultimately, the benefit of the technology is to be delivering the end user warnings directly to individuals so that they can start to block this activity themselves. But if it's of interest as a follow-on, we are also able to deliver an email data loss assessment where users are able to see, or customers are able to see, their own data through the lens of this technology. You can see on the right-hand side here some of the types of sensitive data that we pick up and provide as a report to customers to be able to identify how behavioral AI could be implemented within their own environments. So Michael, thank you very much for having me on today. I hope it's been a good informational session for everyone, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Henry, thank you very much for that. I think that email data loss assessment looks really interesting. There have been a few questions into me, and there's some more questions coming in. So let me just and as I say, if anybody has any questions, please ping them on to me directly, because it's really important from our side that the questions that you have and the issues that you have are raised, so that you get the best out of this session. But it's as we all know, I guess the things that I'm picking out of this is we all see that email, we seem to live on email. It rules our lives or ruins our lives depending on your viewpoint, but it's there all the time. And it's very, very easy from accidentally to do the wrong thing just because we're all seem to be running. But I guess the question here is it the end ultimately of the rule-based DLP products? Is that or the DLP approach? Is that pretty much it's an RIP for that solution stack at this stage, is it?
No, absolutely not, Michael. I think, like anything in security, defense in depth is always the best approach. And rule-based DLP has done a fantastic job of picking up and preventing a lot of that sort of known activity, and being able to identify any of those sort of data types that are easily definable is still a necessary approach. And of course, you can layer adaptive DLP to pick up some of that known activity as well. But I think we're often put in on top of rule-based DLP, albeit that, for some customers, it depends on the maturity of their DLP policies, and some people are starting from a sort of maturity level of a 0 or a 1, and some people are starting a bit higher up that chain. So I think an adaptive approach certainly picks up on a lot of the behavioral activity that's being missed, but that sort of content-centric approach is still necessary for a lot of customers.
And this can be layered on top of a traditional type of approach as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So if you're using a Microsoft Purview, for example, it's certainly doing an effective job for catching some of this activity. But as we all know, it's the things that get through, more of those unknowns, the behavior that people don't have visibility on, that causes a lot of the headache. And so we want to be able to provide a solution that picks up on the activity that perhaps is causing some of the data loss, albeit that you still need some of those building blocks and foundations of your DLP policies to make sure you're catching information that may have already been classified and wants to be protected without the need for just using behavior only.
Perfect. Question here from an attendee: where's the AI engine reside, and does the engine process personal data offsite and outside the EU, or I guess the data residency question?
Yeah, important question. So we are running our infrastructure on AWS, which is based both inside the EU and outside of the EU. So we can be regionally specific, whether that's our data center in Ireland or looking at any of our other data center locations. The AI is based on your data and your data only. So we're not leveraging other customer data in order to train and build an understanding of how we look at your employees. That's very much focused only on the metadata that we can assess for your particular instance. So it's local to you in that regard. And then as we are building that behavioral understanding, we're not looking at personal information. We're very much only focused on the metadata, not the body. We can obviously extract certain information as we do our analysis, but that is not necessary for the long-term storage and understanding of the modeling that we build.
So it's fully compliant in terms of all the regulations, issues, challenges, concerns, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, given that we're a technology that, to take the most obvious one, GDPR compliance, considering that we assist on being able to prevent that from happening. The technology is very much built with that in mind in terms of our own data privacy as well.
It's compliance compliable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Moving on. I'll stop talking now. Question here from somebody. We use the recall button if an email is sent incorrectly. Is that not enough?
So the email recall button is a very interesting, I guess, story because even Microsoft themselves would recommend not to use it, given that when you click the recall button, the email has already been delivered to their inbox, and cannot be completely recalled. It will tell them that you have recalled the email, which typically flags up that there's more of a risk on that particular email, so can cause more problems than it solves. We can actually look at and understand for customers, how often they're recalling emails, and that can be a leading indicator behind how much of an issue this is for any one particular organization. If you have users who are recalling on a weekly or monthly basis, that might mean that they're sending a lot of the wrong emails to the wrong people. So we want to be able to help you dig into that data a little bit more and understand how to be able to solve for it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I guess when you say something about recall button, I've certainly seen recalls, and when you're getting 100 or 200 emails or whatever it is, your eyes might go to the one that's been recalled. It's
Correct. Yeah.
possibly a good way to get people to read your email. But anyway,
Yeah. And I'll
um,
just say, actually, just quickly on that, Michael, if we think about some of these use cases, I mean, how often has anyone on the call sent a file to the wrong person? Or how often has someone, sent it to the wrong individual themselves? I mean, I think I'll admit to it, I've done it several times too. We see it all the time. And it's a very easy mistake to make. And it's very prolific in terms of, the impact that it can have, as I've hopefully shown today. So by no means is this a problem that everyone sat there saying never seen it before. I think it's something that we're very commonly used to seeing. It's just often flying below the radar, I think, of the sort of eyes and visibility of security teams.
yeah. No, I listen. I think everybody has, and if they haven't sent one accidentally themselves, I think they know somebody who has. That's the best way I'll put it at this stage. But it is interesting when somebody, excuse me, talks about the recall button. It sounds like it might well be foremost in their mind, and maybe that's maybe it's been regularly used. So let's move on to the next question. Do you provide visibility of emails being sent to the wrong person, who, how often, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is the misdirected use case in a nutshell. Really, when we are thinking about how we identify that, it's typically an autocomplete error. What we'll notice is that drop down to, instead of Julia Smith at Tufin, it's Julia Smith at One Bank. Once we see that behavior happen, and we flag it to the user, they can go in, they can change that user's address, and the email goes out like normal. So it's a very quick 2 or 3 second process. And again, that's how we can evidence that the technology is working effectively. Is I didn't go into a demo today, but for anyone who wants to see one, we'll obviously be able to reach out, or feel free to reach out to us to get into the UI and show you what the power of it can be. But as we notice users interacting, we'll be able to validate whether a potential misdirected email was actually stopped through those live warning interactions.
Sorry, I'll unmute myself here when I'm talking. But and a question is there another way to help prevent misdelivery of emails? Can I just educate my staff to be more careful?
Yes, I mean, I think education, like anything, it can often be the best way to reduce that sort of bottom line of risk. Individuals being able to take ownership of responsibility around these particular areas can be really important. What we see is that by delivering this in the moment coaching with the technology, that helps to reduce that bottom line of risk more effectively than being able to actually block it with DLP rules, and being able to not only effectively coach people, but also step in and stop it when necessary.
Okay. There's a question here now. It's asking to compare this product, what you have against another product. I'm not sure you're positioned to go into it at this stage in terms of understanding what that might be. But I guess the question is can your product be configured to flag for external recipients alongside all the other features that you outline?
Yes.
Does that make sense? Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
looking for external recipients, specifically something on a block list. Yes, absolutely. So the customization that we can bring in, I think, is where this question's leading, in order to specifically focus on either certain domains, or it might be looking for certain individuals. It is easy for us to build in. So by no means is this a black box where we deliver only the outputs of the AI's understanding. The AI's understanding allows us to be much more customized with the types of policies or modeling that we can then build off the back of it. So to give you an example for that, the sensitivity classification that we put over the types of files that might be leaving an organization could be layered on to a list of individuals that sit within a particular department. So we could say anyone in HR who is sending anything that we think is sensitive, I want them to get an end user warning. So I want to be a bit more heavy-handed. And by the way, the type of warning that they get, there's different ways that we can deliver these warnings. Either they can be silently tracked, so no user warning is provided. We could ask them to provide a justification as to why they're sending this email, or it might be that we just ask them to block the email entirely. So we can be very focused on those use cases and configure them in a way that allows teams, that flexibility as to how they want the technology to interact with their employees. So it doesn't have to be a sort of one size fits all. There's a lot of customization that can be built into the product as well. And you're on mute, Michael.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's been a few times today so far, but no, Henry, apologies for that, the muting. But yeah, so basically, technology can be configured to give somebody the best possible experience, which is appropriate to themselves, and it seems like through AI, you're actually learning from the organization and configuring for the organization.
Yeah, correct. So we want to use the AI to deliver the best understanding that we have to then be able to add that specific lens of customers' requirements to make sure that the accuracy is as high as it can be.
Brilliant. I guess there's no other questions there, but there's a question maybe I have, because you mentioned the email data loss assessment. Is that something? What's the process in doing something like that, and what's typically an outcome of that, or is that something maybe you could just broaden a little bit there for a second or two?
Yeah, of course. This is available for partners and customers alike. We can offer this as a free deployment of the technology to be able to run an assessment of potential email data loss occurring within an organization. So, as I've mentioned, we just need to be able to sync with a Microsoft 365 environment via API. We can take that up to 12 months of historical email data, and with that information be able to provide an initial report and understanding over when potentially sensitive data has left an organization, and also be able to look at potential incidents of misdirected email that may have occurred. So we can provide that in a very fast time period to be able to give customers the insight over, number one, whether there's been any of this activity occurring, and number two, if they want to look at leveraging behavioral AI, what does the data show them about this potential for the risk in their own organization. So we want to deliver that in a very light, quick, and easy fashion. It's silent, so no users will be interacting with any warnings. That could be a second phase as we look at production in the future. But really, this is just an opportunity for everyone or customers to get a sense of whether this activity may or may not be occurring. Obviously, working with Renaissance, partners would be able to request that either directly to Proofpoint or via you. So it's a very easy process to get set up.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And I guess that brings it just to a point. The Proofpoint technology is available. Renaissance, we look after the distribution of that. It's through the Irish marketplace. And it's through a whole range of partners. So if you contact any of the Renaissance team or indeed the Proofpoint team, we'll be able to point anybody who has an interest in this to a partner who's in a position to actually deliver these services. If there are partners out there who have an interest in delivering these services, an interest in understanding this type of technology and how beneficial it can be for their clients and their customers, we can also be contacted. So what I'd particularly like to do is thank everybody for attending today, and thank Henry for that whistle stop tour of email and the scary challenges associated with it, and give everybody a few minutes back so you can grab a coffee before somebody puts you on the next call. But hopefully it's been useful to everybody, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me on.